This is part 2 of the story about the guy who had a depressing life but was selected to take part in a crazy experiment. In case you haven't seen the first part, the playlist will be appearing on the screen and will also be in the description of this video and in the comments. The last video ended with our protagonist inviting the brunette to live with him in his shelter after spending over 30 days completely alone in this post-apocalyptic world. She agreed, but made it clear that nothing romantic would happen between them. So, continuing the story, the day starts with Howard waking up to a loud noise, wondering what the woman could be doing at this hour. He goes to find out and sees several boxes scattered in the hallway. When he asks what she's doing, Sabrina replies that she cleaned up the restaurant's storage to turn it into her room, and if he needed her, he could ring the bell. Howard gets really upset, but that's not all. She also threw away the mannequin he had leaning there, which in the last episode we saw was his only friend, just like Winslow was for Tom Hanks. She says she's going to get it back, but he says she doesn't need to, and angrily goes after the mannequin. But before leaving, he decides to tell her that they should each do their own laundry and cook their own food. She doesn't understand and asks why. He then says it's so they can see each other less often, and that this way she wouldn't have to be on high alert all the time to defend herself, and he wouldn't feel weird when he saw her. Man, the guy is totally tilted. She doesn't understand what's up with this guy, so he tells her that even though she's a beautiful and wealthy woman with a higher position in the company than his, in this world he wouldn't be the gentleman she expected him to be. In other words, folks, the guy went red pill because the woman threw away his mannequin. So we have a time skip of over 90 days. We are now on day 120 of the apocalypse, remembering that the protagonist needs to survive for 180 days to win. Apparently, in these 3 months that have passed, some things have changed in the city. The weather started to get colder, and the horrible smell disappeared. Sabrina filled the place with flower pots, which greatly improved the atmosphere. But despite everything, they don't talk much since that first fight. And even though she seems fine not talking for 3 months, he's not fine at all. He frequently talks to the mannequin Donald, his only friend in this apocalypse. He tells the mannequin that today they would go looking for meat, asking if he preferred spoiled meat from the market or rat meat. Thankfully, he decides they'll go fishing, but before that, they'll make a quick stop at the zoo to visit none other than Dummy, the tiger. Dummy had been feeding on other zoo animals and some meat the protagonist brought him from time to time. Suddenly, the tiger's spider sensor activates, and he dashes out of nowhere. He saw nothing less than a servant, guys, and went straight for it. The detail is that the zoo's servants don't have horns, so these were wild servants. Nature was already encroaching on civilization, much like in The Last of Us. While the protagonist was realizing this, the weather started to suddenly change. The atmosphere turned eerie all of a sudden. Even thunder was rumbling. A powerful wind arrived, and then he realized it was a typhoon. He rushed into the car without understanding anything. How could such a huge typhoon suddenly appear on a sunny day? Then he remembered that all of this was a simulation, a game, and this typhoon was probably just another challenge in the game. The problem was that Sabrina goes cycling up the mountain every day, and given the time, she should be reaching the mountain top at that moment. So, not to lose the only woman left on the face of the earth, the protagonist raced back to his shelter with the car. Even though they weren't talking, he couldn't let anything happen to her, otherwise he would be completely alone again. Arriving there, he sees the door open, which he imagines means she hasn't returned home yet, so he heads as quickly as possible towards the mountain she usually climbs. The weather continued dreadful. Rain, wind, lightning everywhere, until he finally sees her. There she was, leaning against a post. Something had apparently happened. Her leg had a huge cut. But then Howard, our protagonist Chad, picks her up in his arms and takes her back to safety. They were apparently safe in a mansion at the top of the mountain that Sabrina used to visit. The woman continued to be soaked and trembling. He asks to take a look at her wounds, but she doesn't allow it. He says it's not the time to act tough. If she gets an infection, she could die. But she continues to refuse, saying she knows how to take care of herself. It's incredible how even being the only 2 people on Earth in an emergency situation, these 2 still don't get along. The protag says he has a plan. Since they don't know how long this typhoon will last, and the shelter they live in will likely be completely flooded, he suggests they make this mansion their new shelter. She simply agrees and asks how they should go about it. He says that since she's injured, there's not much he can do to help, so she should just stay there and wait. Then the protag, who in one scene is a huge Chad, in the next becomes a lone calf caught in a storm, while the woman just waits, and the weather kept getting worse to the point where it started to snow. Arriving at the shelter, he sees that everything was already flooded, and unfortunately, even their generator had given up. up. He decides to grab as much food as he can until a rush of water and wind knocks down the vegetables they had harvested. He decides to grab whatever he can and make a run for it. Their situation was not good at all. The food they had would last a maximum of 2 days. It was impossible to fish in that gale. Seeing himself in a dead end, he finds himself having to resort to something he had never imagined. He arrives at the zoo, and there is Dummy, the tiger, all injured, apparently having been in a fight. The protag's plan was to use the tiger's hunting skills to get food, but as soon as he sees the animal's condition, the young man tries to get him into the car to tend to his wounds, but the tiger doesn't even flinch. Howard shouts, trying to convince the tiger to follow him, but the tiger roars back, indicating that he'll do as he pleases. The protag tells himself that this is just a game, and he shouldn't get so involved. So he turns around and leaves, leaving the tiger there, in a very sad scene. Back at the house on the mountaintop, the protag sees Sabrina sprawled on the sidewalk. He asks what happened, and she says she wanted to collect rainwater to boil for them, but ended up falling and can't get up. So our hero does the good deed of carrying her inside, presenting us with this beautiful scene. The guy, in an ultra-chad red pill frenzy, slapped the hottie so hard she even moaned, saying that from now on, he would be the one making decisions there. Then he threw her on the bed and said he was going to get a first aid kit. After cleaning the brunette's wound, she asked what he planned to do. He said he once saw a herd of deer, and tomorrow he would try to hunt. She reminds him that wild deer always remember the smell that represents danger to them and stay extremely alert to it. He says it doesn't matter because, either way, he has weapons. Speaking of weapons, he shows her a pistol he found under her pillow when he went to get the vital supplies from their old shelter. He says he left the bullets in it and hands the gun back to the woman. She asks if he doesn't want to keep the gun. He says no, and hopes that this gesture might erase her prejudice against him. And so they say goodbye, because he needs to prepare for the hunt the next day. And in this vibe, day 121 of the apocalypse arrives. It's snowing outside, so our protag bundles up and prepares to go hunting. He thinks to himself that he doesn't even know how to kill a chicken, let alone a deer. But as he pondered these things, a freaking pack of hungry wolves was lurking. Our protag sets out on the hunt, the freezing cold making his breath turn into vapor, and all that could be heard was the wind and his footsteps in the snow, until he seemed to have heard something, so he quickly turns and takes a position. When he was ready to shoot, there was nothing there. He had lost count of how many times this had happened. He could hear them. They must be close by. It's as if they know every move he makes. Maybe Sabrina was right. The deer can recognize his scent. Tired of wasting energy, he decides to try using the fishing net. The problem is, a sinister storm just happened, and in this situation, the river's current becomes very strong. The protag doesn't care and casts the net anyway. Screw it. Now it's just praying it works out. But immediately he feels a tug on the net, and before he could think of anything, he is literally pulled into the river, and man, imagine how cold that is. As soon as he emerges from the water, he doesn't even want to fish anymore and just thinks about going back home and warming up by the fire. But it's at this moment that he sees what he came looking for, a deer. He quickly hides so the deer doesn't see him and starts looking for the gun until he pulls a shotgun from his bag. Then there's no mistake, just aim and shoot. So the protag takes a deep breath and... he missed. Damn, what a dumbass. The recoil from the shotgun was so strong that it hit him hard in the nose, making it bleed, man. This protag is really clueless. He wasted a ton of resources, fell into freezing water, hurt himself, and now, guess what? Of course, the wolves. Luckily, this fool still had the shotgun, so he had a chance to stay alive. But the wolves, unlike our protag, are not at all dumb. They realize that this guy is injured and don't even try their luck. They just bolt. The protag didn't quite understand, but in the mess he was in, he should be grateful for that. Well, back at the mansion on top of the mountain, the protag arrives home, and hey, the brunette was waiting for him, naked, wrapped in a blanket, warming herself by the fire. Finally, something was going right for this guy. He doesn't think twice and starts undressing as quickly as he can. But the guy had just literally fallen into a river in the snow, so all he really wanted was to warm up by the fire. The brunette is initially shy, but soon takes a peek and ends up seeing a photo in the protag's wallet of another woman who also had a well-endowed bust. She asks about this photo, while by now he's naked around the fire. He says she's an ex-girlfriend, she says she's cute, and asks why they broke up. He says he wanted a family, but she wasn't ready for that. Then he asks about her, if she's dating someone. And unfortunately, folks, she says yes. The name of the cuckold, I mean the guy, is Lawrence. She says he has a PhD from MIT and that he is the CEO of a technology company. So the guy is a big shot. The protagonist takes the opportunity opportunity to throw a jab, saying that the guy might be successful but lacks good taste in women because it's pure torture to live with a woman like her. The brunette doesn't take it lightly and yells at him, but in the heat of the moment, she forgets that the guy is naked there and ends up seeing him with his pistol out. On impulse to cover her eyes, she drops the blanket and her melons are exposed, much to our joy, and especially to the protagonist, who even starts bleeding from the nose. The woman is extremely embarrassed and throws things at him, yelling for him to leave immediately, which he does, but still with the beautiful image of her melons in his mind. But regardless, having an erection doesn't help you resist the mood and hunger, does it? So the next day comes, and our hero continues in his attempt to hunt a deer, although all he manages to do is just see a mere shadow of them. Every time he gets close, they disappear. Not to mention, in real life, he had never even touched a gun before. So, well, you can understand why he acted like a fool earlier. Nevertheless, he keeps trying, but there are no results. The good side of all this is that at least now the brunette is talking to him more frequently, and she doesn't complain when he comes home empty-handed. For some reason, she seems to be getting weaker, which is not good at all. Her injuries don't seem to be improving. Even though their bellies had not been full for a long time, the protagonist still held on to hope that things would get better tomorrow. He mentions setting up a trap, a pit with sharp wooden stakes at the bottom, covered with some cabbage leaves. His hope is that, being winter, the wolves won't resist the temptation of the leaves. Sabrina says he should have discussed this with her. After all, it's very risky to do so much manual work in this situation. The protagonist says he's at his limit. He doesn't have the strength to set up another trap like that. In other words, he's gone all in. Tomorrow, they either survive or they don't. So the next day, arriving at the spot where the trap was set, he sees it didn't work. Wait, actually no, there's blood. The animal just escaped from there. So he immediately follows this blood trail, praying that the animal has died. Finally, he reaches a clearing where he sees two wolves devouring the flesh of an animal, the animal that was probably going to be their food. Realizing it was now do or die, he pulls out his gun, and in a frenzy of hunger, fear, and anger, he fires at the animals. Obviously, he misses all shots, and the animals just flee, taking the pieces of the dead deer with them. Realizing that his last hope of not starving to death had disappeared before his eyes, our protag falls to his knees in the snow. He tries to tell himself that it's just a game, that he should control his emotions, but the truth is that the frustration of failing was too much. He screams with all his might, a cry of desperation of someone who has reached their limit. And so we arrive at day 126 of the apocalypse. All they have left to eat is literally a tomato and a cabbage leaf. Sabrina says he can eat. After all, she hasn't helped at all lately. Howard says they're both dying. She doesn't need to be so proud. She silently agrees. Then she tells how until she turned 18, she was just a puppet manipulated by others, mainly by her father, who was a very authoritarian man and used to keep her locked in her room most of the time, unable to go out and play with other children. The guy was so awful that he wouldn't even let her draw. Man, he said she was different from the other siblings, and that sooner or later she would abandon the family like her mother did. The guy had a serious emotional problem and took it all out on her, saying that she could only bring honor to the family by obeying him, and that without their family's power, she was nothing. That explains why she wants to be so independent nowadays. It's the way she found to deal with that trauma. Howard says he understands her, and that they both had a crappy life. He tells her that he always tried really hard in everything he did, but was never rewarded for it. Always lived a mediocre life without being recognized by anyone. She asks if he has any kind of strength that could make him stand out. He says that if he has any strength, it's never giving up once he decides to do something. He's watched a lot of Naruto. That's his ninja way. She asks if he fought for what he wanted because the world is full of people who work hard, and the only way to be recognized is to shine brighter than others. Then she says her purpose is to be independent, and he'll know his when he really strives for something. He asks if helping her survive will earn him her recognition. He says all he ever wanted was to hear once from someone that he mattered. Sabrina asks how she can prove she's independent by letting him help, but the reality is they're almost starving, so she lets go of her pride and accepts. The main character then takes the cabbage leaf and leaves the room all wobbly, practically too weak to do anything. Before leaving, he says that if he doesn't come back home after 3 days, it's probably because he's dead, and she'll find his body in a stream east of the mansion. And if that happens, she'll do the right thing, so he leaves her alone and scared. Oh man, I hope he's not talking about cannibalism. Today's video ends here, my friends. If you enjoyed it, leave that like, comment something to boost engagement, and subscribe to the channel because soon the continuation of this story will be released. Cheers and take care.